Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Let's start off with the copyright disclaimer. Welcome back to part 6 of Cut Into the Murder of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia. In this episode, we're going to look at the viable suspects in the killing of Elizabeth Short, and also note that I don't have a pet favorite suspect, so I just looked at all the suspects and all the evidence and weighed them equally. The pictures of the fellows with Elizabeth that you see here are simply old fiancés, old boyfriends, and friends that she met, mainly servicemen that she was photographed with, and are some of the many photos that were found in her trunk and in her belongings after her murder. Throughout the decades, this case will become so cold that one lead investigator assumed it would only be solved through what he called a fluke arrest. But back in January 1947, a police psychologist, Dr. Paul de River, that's said like, it's pronounced River, but it's spelled like river, who we will bring up later, this police psychologist, he gave a statement to the newspaper that the law of averages trapped Beth Short. One pickup too many. One of the main suspects that was brought up in a previous series here is Mark M. Hansen, whose name was embossed on the cover of Beth's journal or notebook. This notebook was mailed in by the killer and held the names and addresses of Beth's acquaintances with at least one page torn out. Hansen, he was a middle-aged theater owner of the Florentine Gardens located at 5951 Hollywood Boulevard. He rented dormitory-style rooms at 6024 Carlos Avenue, and allegedly he was not averse to exchanging sex for rent from these young girls. Allegedly, he was one of the last people to speak with Beth over the phone. You can see in this clipping that while living in Hansen's place, Beth borrowed one of his unused address books and wrote herein some 76 names, addresses, and telephone numbers of people she knew. Hansen was interviewed as a suspect very early on. After all, his name was on the address book that was in her effects mailed by the killer. Of course, he denied having ever gone out with her, although she had, quote, a lot of dates. But Mark Hansen had told Ann Toth that he received a wire from Beth, and then he told Ann Toth that Beth had gone to San Diego, which we know that she had gone to San Diego in this timeline. And Beth had, while she was in San Diego, asked him for money to get back to Los Angeles, and that he didn't send it to her, okay? We know now that Red had gone and picked her up at San Diego and brought her back to L.A. And Ann Toth claims that Hansen knew how to perform abortions, which is a kind of a strange thing to do as a part owner in Florentine Gardens and also perform abortions on the side. I'm not sure if they asked her directly that question, but she did say that. When questioned about Hansen's relationship to Beth, Anne said that, quote, he asked her not to go with other fellows, so she did likewise. This newspaper article of January 26, 1947 notes that Hansen was eliminated after asserting that he had not seen the girl since last November. Beth had lived at Mark Hansen's house from October through November 13th and left, or what we should say was kicked out, when Beth got into an argument with another girl. And I wonder, could Beth called Mark Hansen or one of his associates from the lobby of the Biltmore? It's possible. I'm not sure. One thing we do know was that a few years later, a woman named Lola Titus shot Mark Hansen and was ruled insane. Here's a clipping after the, quote, dime-a-dance girl who worked at the theater shot Mark Hansen, and he lived to tell the tale, and she was found to be unwell. And they mentioned how he had been questioned by police in the Black Dahlia investigation. Strap on, strap in for the next set of suspects. This is crazy, all right? Just FYI, I know this is nuts. Leslie Dillon, this fellow here, age 27. He was considered a quote-unquote red-hot suspect, according to the LAPD. He was a bellhop at a Santa Monica hotel He was also known as Jack Sands. Think this is LA. Everybody's got a stage name or a nom de plume or whatever. He was also a former sailor who was interested in sadism. So he breaks down after a night of questioning and he's booked for her murder. And let me tell you how he came on the police's radar. This is insane. Remember Dr. Paul D. River, the police psychiatrist? So that fellow writes an article on sadism and psychopathic cases like the Black Dahlia. All right. And what happens is this fellow reads the article essentially about the Black Dahlia. And he contacts Dr. Paul D. River and says he wants to collaborate with a psychiatrist and that he was interested in sadism. So Dr. Paul D. River almost starts a sort of a sting operation where they get Leslie to come and meet and try to put the screws to him to see what he knows about the Black Dahlia. Okay, so just to recap this craziness, Dr. Paul D. River writes a detective story written in May of that year about the Black Dahlia. And Dillon reads the story, contacts the psychiatrist who happens to be working for the LAPD to discuss the sadism in the Black Dahlia murder. Seemingly, Leslie Dillon knew some unpublished details of the murder. This is what pricked the doctor's interest and then the detective's interest in order to try to get him at a location in order to put the screws to him. Also to note, Leslie Dillon had worked as a mortician's assistant in the past at the Hahn Funeral Home in Oklahoma. All right, but having said all that, Dillon denies knowing Beth Short and denied murdering her. Of course, the fingerprints of suspect Leslie Dwayne Dillon were submitted for comparison with the Laytons that were previously submitted at the FBI, and they were not found to match the fingerprints on file. So when asked how he knew some details of the crime that weren't published, Leslie Dillon turns around and fingers this fella Jeff Connors, otherwise known as Arthur Lane or Artie Loy, as the murderer. So Jeff Connors, otherwise known as Arthur Lane or Artie Loy, was eventually located, and he admitted that he knew Elizabeth Short by sight. And he said that he saw Beth in a bar the night before her body had been found. That's January 14th. So it starts getting very interesting. Then there starts a long, convoluted alibi issue with no one really knowing anybody's true name. It's absolutely insane because Jeff Connors said that he had been working with someone named Vicki Evans on a Columbia Pictures lot the evening Short went missing. That was January 14th, but in the same breath he said he saw her in a bar the night before, so which is it? Anyway, Connors claimed that he'd been with this dancer named Vicki Evans, and she disproved it very easily. You see that in all these newspaper articles of the time. Strangely enough, just to get your heads really scratching, Vicki Evans was also the principal in the Robert Mitchum marijuana case that also had Dr. Paul D. River on as a witness, as a psych witness. So it's very strange. But Connors had been working on the Columbia lot with Grace Allen, that's the person you see in this clipping here, not Vicki Evans. Originally, Columbia Pictures had denied that Connors was even on their payroll, but it turns out his real name is Arthur H. Lane, and he was on their payroll, and he'd been working that night at Columbia Pictures with Miss Grace Allen, who just so happened to be his ex-wife. And so the payroll records did support that Artie Lane had worked as a laborer. Police psychiatrist DeRiver was later involved in a grand jury that was looking into the unsolved murders and law enforcement's handling of said murders, like the Black Dahlia, and many on the force began to see him as a rat, allegedly. So then Dr. J. Paul DeRiver, in July of 1950, was found guilty of 4 misdemeanor charges for failing to keep proper narcotics records. What happened was he had a truly very sick, ailing wife, and he put his friend's name on some narcotic scripts, and then he administered the narcotics to his very sick wife. There was no allegation that he took the drugs himself. He actually had forged 42 scripts in total and had given the dilaudid to the wife. But Dr. Paul DeRiver claimed that he was caught in the middle of police departmental factional infighting, and that they essentially retaliated against him and did away with his position as the police psychiatrist. He saw some kind of a cover-up in his story, and he felt that he truly believed that Leslie Dillon, had worked for Mark Hansen and some guy named Nils Granlund, and that Leslie Dillon had been the killer, but that he had been seen as a quote-unquote rat, and there was a cover-up, and that then they did everything they could to stop him. So there's people that believe still today that Mark Hansen was the killer. There's also people that believe that Leslie Dillon was the killer along with Mark Hansen, or as an associate of Mark Hansen. There's people that believe that Leslie Dillon did it of his own accord. And then there's people that believe that Leslie Dillon did it along with another associate like Arthur Lane. Frankly, once you start talking about nightclub owners and any kind of underworld figure, anything's possible. The fingerprints were not Leslie Dillon's fingerprints. And Dr. Paul DeRiver, of course, everybody wants to think they are the one that solved the case, right? I mean, that's like a natural thing with an investigator or a psychiatrist. They want to think they're the one that solved the case. Who knows? All we know is that obviously the FBI looked into Dillon with the fingerprints. It didn't match. But there is something hinky about this, just not sure. Not sure why they didn't dig a little deeper into Mark Hansen, or if they did and they just didn't release the stuff that they had in the file. So let's move on to the next suspect. You guys are probably waiting with bated breath for this one. Dr. George Hill Hodel, and this is his son, Stephen Hodel, holding the book that he wrote, one of the many books he wrote on his father. There's something I want to say, and I want to be as clear and concise as possible. This is just my opinion, not fact. I've read the Black Dahlia Adventure. It's an excellent read. Now, Steve Hodel later claimed that he believes that his father probably was the Black Dahlia, known as the Black Dahlia Avenger. I believe that he believes it. I want to note this, that Stephen will tell you he had an axe to grind against his father. In my opinion, his axe to grind against his dad was his first wife, Stephen's first wife, only got with him to piss off his father. And he will tell you this in his own book, all right? He will say that his first wife had once been George Hodel's mistress before she met Stephen, all right? And that there's some scene in one of his books where he goes to introduce his father to his wife, and she's like, "Hi, George," because she already knew his dad, and that they then broke up soon thereafter. He essentially tells the reader in no uncertain terms that his wife got with him to tick off the dad or to make some point with the dad. In my opinion, that's going to leave you feeling some kind of way, even subconsciously. His ex-wife had been George Hodel's mistress, and that his ex-wife's picture was also one of the pictures in that little picture book that he later says contains 2 unknown pictures of Beth Short. And he'll tell you this, all right, between the lines. Now think, would that not tick you off to no end? Just about the time your dad dies and you've made up with your dad, or you have a good relationship with your dad, your stepmom gives you the little picture album, and then your ex-wife's in there again. You know, the one that was only with you because to tick off your dad. I mean, he tells you this stuff, but then he just kind of backs away from it, and, you know, he sees these 2 pictures, and he thinks they look like the Black Dahlia. By the way, I do facial sketches, and I told you, the first time I read that, I'm like, that's not the Black Dahlia. That's not her face. Sorry, neither of those pictures are the Black Dahlia. Now, having said all that crap I just said, I don't think that he was wrong, necessarily. His father could very well have killed the Black Dahlia. So does allegedly having an axe to grind against someone mean that the person didn't do what you think they possibly could have done? Absolutely not. If you think someone's a jerk and they turn out to be a jerk, it's very, very well true they could be a jerk. I just wanted to point it out because a lot of people don't point it out. And it's kind of like, how can you not point that out? I mean, how can you gloss over that? But okay. So the story goes that George Hill Hodel dies, and the stepmother gives Stephen Hodel a little book that's got pictures in it, and that Stephen's thumbing through the pictures, and then there's two of them that are bugging him because they look like someone he knows or look similar, and then it hits him later, oh my gosh, this looks like the Black Dahlia. And so then he starts to thinking that maybe his father is the Black Dahlia killer. I do want to add that I do believe that as of today's date, both those pictures in that little photo album have been identified as the two different women, and then neither of which are Elizabeth Short. And I do believe that Steve Hodel has admitted that, just for the record. So let's start from what we can work with. If there's no pictures of the Black Dahlia, I went and looked at his history in the public record just to see what I could find. And on May 1st, 1946, I found that Mrs. Dorothy Hodel, that was Dr. George Hill Hodel's wife, mother of, or ex-wife, mother of Stephen, okay? She was sentenced to 90 days in jail for neglecting her children. That was Michael, Stephen was 4 at the time, and Kelvin. The children were found in a litter of rags and filth. So sad. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail for her third offense for this, okay? She claimed she was so busy as she'd been writing 2 books. Seemingly she had custody, all right? So that was 1946, and Stephen was 4. On July 27th, 1947, Helena Kuo, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Kuo, was an author, and she was a house guest at that 5121 Franklin Avenue house owned by Dr. Hodel that you'll hear so much about, the Soden house. So this lady, an author, was at the house, and she was staying there. It made the papers. And on November 19, 1947, a 1,400-year-old Chinese sacrificial tablet was stolen from the Hodel home on Franklin. A sacrificial tablet. That's pretty wild, okay? The burglar must have known what he or she was after, as the tablet was the only thing stolen from the home, and it was worth $25,000 in 1947. So stop and think about that. So it's 1947. You have where the ex-wife is moved out of the Soden house, is not taking good care of her own children. You've got Dr. Hodel is hosting different authors at his house. It's making the papers. Then later on in the year, a sacrificial tablet is stolen from his house. Also throughout the stories told by his own daughter, when she alleges that he did horrible things to her, which I believe he actually did, it has people in and out of that house like it was a salon of some kind. So to think that he would have the Black Dahlia tied up and being tortured without other people knowing about it would be a real stretch in my imagination. So according to the son Stephen, he's received this picture album of his father's. He sees 2 photographs he believes could be the Black Dahlia. He also sees some handwriting he thinks is similar to his father's, that he believes that could have been written by the Black Dahlia. Was one of the letters that actually had handwriting. He thought that there were some similarities between Dr. Hodel's handwriting and that written on the Black Dahlia Avenger postcard. In addition, he then talked to his sister, Tamar, who had accused the father when she was 14 years old of incest. I can't say that here on YouTube. So he was arrested on this moral case against his own daughter, and his daughter had alleged the incident happened in July of 1949. The newspaper article here notes that Hodel was a photography enthusiast, so that's true. Stephen has alleged that he saw a similarity between the Black Dahlia posing of the body and one of Man Ray's photographs, which was Man Ray was one of his father's favorite artists. And that also that questionable photos and art was seized from the Hodel home whenever Tamar had alleged she was bothered by her father. So also Tamar had an abortion as a result of the crime that her father perpetrated against her. And also the doctor Dr. France C. Ballard and his assistant were arrested. Now, this is all back in 1949. Stephen was probably about, he was probably about 6 at this age, so he wasn't as old as his 14-year-old sister, wasn't aware of all the stuff that had gone on in the past, and that allegedly, back in the day, Dr. Hodel was a suspect in the Black Dahlia case. See, this is what Tamar reveals to her brother later on. Just want to state that the night that Tamar was allegedly assaulted, Hodel was hypnotizing a woman, Barbara Sherman, in his living room at the Soden house, and that Sherman had told the police that she'd seen improper acts between Hodel and his daughter. But Sherman later recanted this story in court and was charged. A woman named Corinne Taryn also told the court that she'd been hypnotized by Hodel. This is so creepy, by the way. Regardless of the witnesses at the trial, Tamar's own mother and I believe her grandmother took the stand and said that she was a liar and a fantasist, and the jury decided to believe the mother and the grandmother against Tamar, and they just kind of tossed out the charges against Dr. Hodel. I do believe that Dr. Hodel did improper things to his daughter. So what are the links and the similarities to the crime? What's linking Dr. Hodel today to the Black Dahlia? Well, the LAPD actually had him as a suspect because after Tamar accused her father, they looked into him, and he was a doctor, and he knew anatomy, even though he practiced as a psychiatrist. He did. He practiced as a psychiatrist, but he ran a venereal disease clinic and perhaps did abortions at some point in his career. According to his son, he was the head of the Los Angeles County Health Department at some point. So the LAPD later revealed that Dr. Hodel had been a suspect. And due to Tamar's outcry, they had put some hidden electronic surveillance in his home in March of 1950. Okay, so think that's 3 years after the Dahlia murder. And that these transcripts that were still around in a file revealed some very suspicious comments by Dr. Hodel regarding the Black Dahlia. Like, so if I did kill the Black Dahlia, those if qualifying statements. However, it's also noted that Hodel knew his phones were being tapped, as he allegedly told all the callers as such. So if you know your phones are being tapped, you're certainly not going to sit there and confess your life's story and all your crimes on the calls, are you? But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to deny that Dr. Hodel was a suspect. I'm not going to deny or take any issue with, to me, the posing of the body does look like the Man Ray photograph. I'm not going to deny that the Soden house wouldn't be an excellent place. It wasn't a hotel. It had running water. It had some privacy. If you didn't have people going in and out of it all the time, yeah, that would be an excellent place. I'm not going to deny that Dr. Hodel wasn't a pervert. I'm not going to deny that Dr. Hodel wasn't a doctor and knew anatomy and perhaps could even have performed that bisection. He could have. I mean, he seems to have been a real rotten character. But by that same token, was there ever any history of him doing anything like that? No. Some folks think that that Black Dahlia Avenger letter wasn't a true Black Dahlia letter. So that's another problem. The ones they could totally link to the Black Dahlia were the ones that were pasted in the letters that included the belongings. Once they started using the handwriting, they're not even 100% sure that wasn't a hoax. So could you imagine saying that that was Dr. Hodel's handwriting, or that the handwriting analysis matches it, but yet that was a hoax letter? You may see now where I have doubts. They're pictures. They're alleged to possibly be the Black Dahlia. Now it's proven they're not. Allegedly, the handwriting may or may not match Dr. Hodel, but then they're probably hoax letters. Then it's claimed by some people that in 1950, after it started getting hot, that Dr. Hodel allegedly fled overseas. When I go right on to the newspapers.com site and put in his name, I could see that he went to Hawaii to work. It doesn't really seem like that's fleeing overseas. I mean, that's still United States, you're still able to be brought right back to the mainland. So once you get like some facts that aren't accurate and that easily can be dismissed or proven wrong, but then you've hinged a lot of your case on that, then it makes it start to fall apart, and then I start doubting everything. So that's my problem with Dr. Hodel as a suspect. Too many things have been purported to be almost as fact that are not facts at all, or have been now proved to be untrue, that now it's got me to the point where I think that he was yet another scumbag doctor. You know, and there's a whole list of them. I mean, I didn't include a lot of them because they were ruled out by fingerprints or they were ruled out by cranks or whatever, but there were other doctors in the LA area that were viable suspects for this case. But, you know, you have to have motive, and you have to have opportunity, and you have to have time. There was a fellow named Dr. Walter Alonso Bailey that people like for this. Dr. Walter Bailey received his doctorate in 1905 from the University of Southern California. I mean, he was a surgeon. He lived a block away, 1 block south from the crime scene. And contrary to opinion, he was not an abortionist, though. And Dr. Bailey had declining mental health in his final years. He died in January of 1948, so the next year, of degenerative brain disease. Dr. Bailey would have had the skill to cut the body in that manner. He would have had the opportunity to commit the crime. He was right 1 block south. Another thing that ties him in with the Black Dahlia was that Bailey's daughter was friends with Betty's sister Virginia, the one that lived in Berkeley. The daughter was also a part of Virginia's wedding party. So one could ask, could Betty have contacted the daughter when she was at loose ends and looking for Virginia? You know, was she sitting there at the Biltmore? She had told Red that she was going to go and be with her sister, but her sister didn't know anything about it. Did she at the last minute try to get a hold of Virginia, but instead get a hold of Dr. Bailey? I mean, we don't know. We really don't know. Dr. Bailey had no history of violence, and he only had proximity to the crime scene and the ability to do the crime and an unwellness to the brain. But see, that doesn't make someone guilty, just like Dr. Hodel. In a modern investigation, it would appear that today the Black Dahlia would be a solvable case. We could use the DNA. We could use the brush particles. We could use touch DNA. It could be solved. But since all the suspects are more than likely dead, and since the file has a good portion of it, if not all of the viable parts, has gone missing, at this point, I don't know if it's ever going to be solved. I think it's solvable, but are the authorities willing to solve it due to the expense? Are they willing to take and find every bit of DNA evidence? I mean, do they even have it? They might have the letters. The fingerprints from the letters with the belongings were on file with the LAPD and were sent to the FBI. So in theory, there are still some, at least, fingerprint records. Would they be willing to put old DNA through, knowing that the killer, even if it was matched, would be dead? Is that an expense they're willing to take? One would hope. I mean, one would think that under the stamp there certainly would have been DNA, but it's probably too degraded if they hadn't thrown it away. So modern day, would it be solvable? I would think so. Could it be solved? Not sure. Not sure they even have the evidence. We're left with opinions and speculation and YouTube videos and people writing books. That's pretty much what we're left with. And it's sad because there's a girl, Elizabeth Short, who deserves justice. So I hope you found this video and this series to be informative. And if you did, please push the like button and hit the subscribe bell. And also, please feel free to leave me any comments or any opinions on who you think did it. Or if you have an idea of somebody I didn't cover that maybe I could go and do a little research, I'll be more than happy to do so. And without further ado, have an excellent day. Bye.